Well, it's an honor and a privilege to be here today on Lekwungen territory. The Songhees, the Esquimalt, the Wasanic people. This is deja vu for me. I'd like to thank the organizers for ensuring that we're all following COVID protocols, got our masks on, keeping socially distant, got our hand sanitizers, a nice freshly sanitized microphone. This is deja vu for me though. 29 years ago, 30 years ago, 27 years ago, in the 1991, 92, 93 years, I worked for Western Canada Wilderness Committee. I was a sound man, I was a musician, and I can't tell you, I lost count of the number of times that I was running the board over there, speaking here, playing my bass with a reggae band, to fight for Carmanah, to fight for Walbran, and to fight for Clayoquot Sound. And we won those battles. We won those fights. And we won because we stood together, all of us, to stand up against the government. We were all disappointed back in those days because we thought we were going to get something different from an NDP government. But what we got was more of the same. And what we've seen is more of the same. Year in and year out, decade after decade, it doesn't matter whether it's the Liberals or the NDP in power, they continue the same destructive practices, destroying these territories. Shame is right. In 1993, I'm a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, before I became a politician. I flew over southern Vancouver Island with Western Canada Wilderness Committee to document which valleys were still intact on southern Vancouver Island. And the forest companies at the time were driving roads into intact valleys and putting a clear cut up at the head so that the environmental organizations would stop fighting for those valleys. And if you thought about Vancouver Island as a banquet table and the old growth forest as the feast, there are nothing but crumbs left on that table. And they have finally asked the First Nations, whose territory this is, to come and enjoy this banquet. How unethical and immoral is that? I say it is a shameful thing. These are their territories and they should be making the decisions about what is done on them. I'm now the Member of Parliament for Nanaimo Ladysmith on the traditional territory of the Nanaimo, Stanawis, Staminas, and Layaxan First Nations. And their territory was privatized for the ENN land grant, and it's all been logged out, all of it. The endangered Douglas fir ecosystem, less than 1% of it exists now. And those forests are monocultures. And they have lost access to their traditional medicines because their traditional medicines don't grow in monoculture forests. They need biodiversity. Biodiversity for their medicines, for their Stanawith. And as a member of Parliament, I've been fighting, I've been telling the government that they need to stand up. We're in a climate crisis. We declared a climate emergency in the House of Commons in 2019, but we're sure not acting like it's an emergency. These trees, these old growth trees, can sequester far more carbon than an acre of seedlings. It doesn't make any sense to be clear cutting and then planting seedlings. So I tell the government it's a great idea to plant 2 billion trees, but what we need to do is protect the existing trees. And the federal government has made a commitment, and I'm telling them they need to get on it right now. They have committed to protect 30% of the wilderness in the Canadian nature legacy by 2030, to protect the biodiversity and precious ecosystems. Well, here on Vancouver Island, there's no way they could protect 30% of the old growth valley bottom big tree forest because we don't have 30% left. We have less than 10%. Only a few percent are protected in parks. It is shameful. The part of the program that they have is for Indigenous protected and conserved areas that put lands under the authority and control of First Nations. And it's a great program. But what we need is a moratorium on logging right now so that that program could be put in place. So that First Nations can have control and authority over their territories. And we need the financial backing to ensure that First Nations can protect their old growth forests and use the secondary forests. We said 30 years ago that we have enough secondary forests that we can use if we put in value-added manufacturing and make sure that every tree maximized employment, maximize the economic benefit. And that's what should be happening now. Under the control and authority of the First Nations whose territory those trees are growing on. But we need a moratorium now. Because the problem is, back 30 years ago, it was easier to log an old growth ecosystem than it was to protect it. And the same problem exists today. It's easier to go and log, for the government to go and log, than it is to protect. And it takes all of us to get out there and hundreds of people to get arrested to save these forests. And I want to give a shout out to the organizers, to the Rainforest Flying Squad, to the people who spent 8 months blocking those roads. You've done an amazing job. I thank you. I can't thank you enough. I'm in the House of Commons fighting for you. I also want to tell you that as a member of Parliament, I can tell you that when you write me a letter, when you phone my office, you're putting the heat on. And that's what you need to do with these people right here. There are MLAs. There are MLAs and ministers in this government who call themselves environmentalists. Well, they need to get down to it, brass tacks. Let's become environmentalists. Let's show your environmental credentials and stop this logging. So keep the heat on. Don't let up. I'll see you out at Fairy Creek. Thank you so much.